Hi there, welcome to the 59th installment of the ChessTDD series. I am going to, I guess, briefly mention that, as often is the case, it's been a while since last time. I'm going to try to get out of the business of apologizing, because that just seems lame. No excuses, I'll just fail at things, and, that'll be that. On to the point at hand, I had last time picked up, after sort of in difficult fashion, slogging my way through a Stack Overflow resulting from a circular set of calls that had in turn resulted from doing something I generally advise people not to, which is to have circular dependencies. This time they're at the class and I don't believe namespace level. Certainly not at the assembly level where they turn into real problems, but circular dependencies, as we saw last time, do turn into problematic things that can go wrong in general in your code base. So last time up was a relative slog. This time up, I was hoping as I coded this up that it would prove not to be. I will not ruin the surprise for you. So what I started doing here was implementing the idea that a king should not be able to move into check. So if you're playing a chess video game and there's a square that your king, as you can see here, this black queen on 4-8, the king is not in check, but if the king were to move into that fourth column, the king would then be in check. So if you're playing, some chess video game, when you go and highlight the king, those moves in column 4 won't be available because of the threatening of that piece. So what I did was I basically just borrowed the setup from the previous from the previous spec flow scenario that I had used last time, and said, okay, well, we'll tweak this a little bit to say that the king can't move into check. And then I also updated the previous test because that test I knew off the top would be invalidated. Now, I'll also point out something you just saw me do here. I don't know how I got into this state of affairs where I had a commented out test. However that happened, I don't care. When there is commented out code and you encounter it, I follow the Uncle Bob. At least this is where I saw this originally. Don't reason about it. Don't think about it. Don't do anything with it. Just immediately delete it. I absolutely just instinctively now delete commented out code on site. I don't want to know what it does. I mean, what happens if you comment that code or uncomment the code and it works? Is that a valid test? You know what I mean? Or think of it if it's in production code. If it even compiles, is that a good thing? Obviously, nothing's using it. So anyway, that is just an aside I thought I would mention real quickly. Okay, now apart from the commented out code, the other thing I'm doing here is just, at least in my opinion, which apparently varied from my opinion 6 months ago or whenever I wrote this stuff, I thought it'd be cleaner just to get rid of this returning wrapper of a static method. I was kind of, maybe this was early in the days of having implemented that board coordinate 4 or something, but I just spent a few minutes here kind of, in my opinion, straightening up, reducing this to 3 lines, making it more readable, touching up the names of these constants. You're going to see me come in here shortly too and change the name of the test class, since obviously a lot has changed. I suspect that what happened is I originally implemented this class, and then at some point these tests became a little bit of collateral damage in some other refactoring I was doing, and at the time I was probably just getting them to pass without spending too much effort here, when I probably should have gone back and taken a deeper look. I don't know that. I haven't gone back and, watched all the episodes or whatever. I'm just guessing that's probably what happened. So there was some dead stuff in here, things that don't make a ton of sense anymore. So rather than just implement something and go about my business, I want to take some time while I'm here and do the right thing. Figuring out which of these constants I'm even using anymore, which is really just this king start and the king move where I want to look at the king going, and then like, you know, I'm instantiating that king rook start. It was probably used by that test I just deleted. So clean up, and then for whatever reason, now I have a constant that I actually should have factored out that I didn't. So I'll take a little bit of time and do that too, and call that queen's rook or whatever it's supposed to be called, just to get kind of back up to speed here. I did think about, if memory serves, going in and saying assert is false, king's moves dot any board coordinate that matches instead of 7-1, giving that a name, but I think for the purpose of that test, not such a big deal at this point. The other thing that might have been worth doing is to reuse some of the constants from that that big stint I had with all the naming and the castling status checker. Maybe just grabbing those constants or something like that. Or maybe this is a case where, you know, I don't know, maybe the board class in production should have a whole bunch of constants defined for common pieces. All things worth thinking about. There's no right answers to this kind of stuff. You just gotta use your judgment. If you're pairing with somebody or working with a group, that's a kind of good thing to bounce off of other people. And when there's no right or wrong answer, come to a consensus if you can. But I lack a group. I just have a whole bunch of people that are watching, all of whom probably have different opinions, so I kind of have to be my own consensus. So the consensus of one that I reached here was to leave that particular constant and also not name this particular one because it's just a square I'm trying to move to. So what I've done now is I've got these two failing features, and then I realized also I had forgotten at the moment, but like I couldn't move to either one of those squares in the 4 column because of where the black king was positioned. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking the failing test at the feature level, and I'm trying to express it more precisely at the unit level so that I can kind of go in here, and now I've got this slightly more complex hypothesis, but I think that if I fix this unit test, then I'll get everything green. So I'll feel almost doubly good about it if that's the way life works. It's like I've got multiple hypotheses, which I don't like view as a problem. Maybe some people, and I've covered this before, would only want to do one failing test, then get that test pass. I don't have any particular qualm about driving production code changes by having multiple tests fail. So your mileage may vary on that one, but you know, I feel pretty good about that opinion. It's kind of, if you go the other way, that things get to be a problem where you you know, you're messing around in production when nothing's green, or driving when nothing's red. Driving production changes without a failing test is where you start getting into trouble when you're trying to have good coverage and good reasoning in your coverage in your tests. Okay, so, sorry, if you're hearing that noise in the background, I am in a place right now where the roof is quite thin and there's kind of rain and stuff blowing onto the roof. I think the roof is like made of tin or something, so you might get some occasional, like, you know, white noise app type sounds going here. So, what I did here is now set about trying to get these things to pass, and my hope in going into this episode was I just built this threat evaluator thing that really ought to, you know, this should be a fairly straightforward thing to do. I think I did all the heavy lifting with determining threats and all the rules around castling. So just determining if some piece on the board is threatened strikes me as something that ought to be relatively simple. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is interesting. And it sort of speaks to a little bit more coupling than I'd like, and what happens when you have a lot of tests and you're nearing the end of a complex implementation. And what that is that you're seeing is I'm actually going to write a method and kind of do this whole set of things down here. And this is not like in the code kata exercises you might do or something where the simplest thing to get all the tests passing is going to be to, like, you know, increment a variable or, like, you know, add an if condition. I'm writing an entire method here. And you might wonder, is this the simplest thing I could do to get everything green? And sadly, and this is a bit of a smell maybe, but the answer here is yes, because I could try to do something sort of simple or obtuse or whatever, but that's going to start driving tests red. This is pretty interdependent. Like, there are all sorts of tests that are hitting get moves from with all sorts of business rules. So really, I can't take shortcuts. I kind of have to add whole cloth here. Now, in terms of what I am actually doing, implementation-wise, I've created this method called isMoveThreatenedKing that takes a piece and a destination move. So some piece is going to be in this move destination on the board. And what I'm returning here is if we take that piece and put it there, does it turn into a threatened king? So the first thing that would need to be true for this is that the candidate would have to be a king. And then the second thing that would have to be true is that the destination is threatened by the color of, or is threatened for the color of the move candidate. And I'm getting back into the problem I had here last time, which is, again, the trouble with representing this thing with the Boolean, something that I need to go back and refactor. I've had a suggestion for an enum. I don't like enums. I don't like using them, but it's the best suggestion I've had and kind of the only one I can think of without creating sort of a very contrived value type or something like that. I'm not really prioritizing it at the moment because I'm hoping that I'm mostly done with the implementation for now until some refactoring, like that one, is on the docket. But I think that might be the last major feature to be implemented here. But before I get ahead of myself, there's 13 failing unit tests, so I haven't really implemented anything. Started looking at a couple of these, and I realized pretty quickly that I was, as I just mentioned, not especially confident that I was flipping the right bit, so to speak, in what I was passing to that method. So I was thinking that we'd want to do the opposite of is a first player piece, but this is threatened. When I put it back, everything goes green except for one test. And if you see a subtle thing in this test going on, I'd accidentally, probably via copy and paste, put a white knight in 8. And the white knight, now that I've implemented this, which is kind of a nice test, the white knight at 8 is actually threatening one of that king's moves. So this will now go green. How's that for catching a random old copy and paste error? So now everything's green, and I feel pretty good about that. And then I was thinking back on the actual semantics of what I was doing there, and I realized that that this is what jives with whether it's threatened. I forget the name of it exactly, but is it the piece of this color attacking? That is going to keep confusing people. The only reason I'm not slamming that up to the top right now is because I just don't anticipate doing much with it. Might be one of those things where the next time I touch it, it's just time to say enough is enough. Hey, look, I've been doing this since before the latest language version of C#, because I would be now using that throw new argument exception name of, probably. Anyway, interesting observation just about how long I've been at this. Now that everything's green, I just want to make this a little bit more readable. I kind of, over the years, have gotten away from this instantiate and execute syntax all in one statement. It just has, over the years, come to feel kind of kludgy to me. But then I follow that up by forgetting that I should delete the new operator if I do that. Luckily, I didn't keep making that silly mistake for very long. So these are low risk refactorings, and everything seems to be going well. I've still got all my tests green. So at this point, I started to think about moving that over into done, but I decided I wanted to write maybe another acceptance test or two here. I think at the very least, given some of the problems that I've had in previous episodes, I should do this with the reverse scenario in terms of the pieces. So does this also work for the Black King? Now, unlike a lot of the piece movement, I'd think this to be a much lower risk, but better to know by knowing. So I'm just going to go through the process here, having been burned by that copy and paste in that random acceptance test method earlier. I will go through and just type the pieces. Although I've also learned over the course of doing it that I can sometimes brainlessly type things and get them wrong that way. And I kind of decided as I was doing this, I actually didn't need to bother deleting the white pieces. I just needed to update which piece I was evaluating moves for. And I want to be evaluating moves for the black king, so that's 5-8. And then again, in the same way, it's going to have 4 cut off, but I've got to invert the y coordinate on all these. And once I do that, I feel pretty good that this is a test that's going to pass. And then after I got this guy passing, I did one more scenario, which I thought there would be some value in saying, and this is kind of a gut thing, not an exact science, but I said, let's do one situation where like a king should be threatened always. I guess I could have put the king in the middle of the board if I wanted to be a little more rigorous about it, but I took this scenario and added a couple of white pieces that basically threatened every square around the king without threatening the king. And when I think on it, that could come later, but the actual problem is, it was asked of me all those months and months ago, was to write an engine that would evaluate the moves from a given square rather than simulating a chess piece or a chess game per se. So concepts like check and checkmate, I think I'm going to leave as out of scope. Oh, something interesting I did here. I had only put the one thing in there, so I kind of like executed this transient test where, having only put the rook in, I expected to see one move, confirm that one green, and then updated the test, removed the last move, confirmed it was green. That's something you can do if you're so inclined. I would just say in general, anything that you're doing as you work to constantly be confirming your understanding of the code base. Persistent unit test, great way to do it. Acceptance test, good way to do it. But there's all sorts of ways you can confirm your understanding of what your code's doing. And if they're out there, I recommend them. So it's time for the end of the episode housekeeping. This is episode 59 that I'm going to deliver up to GitHub. And then I think I'm going to update the Trello board real quick, and that'll do it. Maybe I don't even do that. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.